Investigation of the resurrection. There's a book called The Historical Jesus by a guy named Gary Habermas. He's got all kinds of initials after his name, been to all kinds of schools. As of the writing of this, which I think is about 13 years ago, he was a professor at Liberty University. But one of the things in investigating the resurrection, there is the obvious question, well, how do you know? How do you know it's true? It's written 2,000 years ago. It's written by people who, I can remember as a kid in 4th grade in Catholic school, elementary school, I raised my hand during religion class, and I asked this question. I said, Sister Mary, and I can't remember her last name, how do we know that Jesus really existed? How do we really know he died and rose from the dead? How do we know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John didn't just, come up with this idea for a church, for an organization, make themselves rich and important and famous and have the cool clothes like, you guys wear? And how do we know that? I didn't say it like that. I said it actually much more respectfully. And she immediately chastised me and sent me to the priest for asking such a horrible question. And so I posed the question to the priest as well. And he lectured me for what seemed like an eternity about the fact that I should not have such questions in my mind. You shouldn't question this. This is a matter of faith. Just take it by faith. But he never gave me an answer. I left very disappointed and just feeling like, man, seems like some kind of, I don't know. This doesn't seem right. Well, you can investigate the scriptures. And we had a series, 2 years ago now, where we talked about the origin of the Bible. Is it factual? Is it reliable? What about it's so old? Then all the manuscripts are different from each other, and people made it up, and it was written hundreds of years later, and we found that all of those statements I just made are not true. It is old, but the manuscript evidence is more reliable than the manuscript evidence for Roman history. It's amazing. And you can investigate the resurrection as well. And scholars who have investigated this, scholars who both believe in the resurrection and don't believe in the resurrection, they will agree to 12, at least 11. The 12th is so-so, but at least 11 of these points as being verifiable historical fact, as much as any historical fact that you believe about anything that happened other than today. And these are the 12. Jesus died by crucifixion, that he was buried, that his death caused the disciples to despair and lose hope, believing that his life was ended. Although not as widely accepted, most scholars hold that the tomb in which Jesus was buried was discovered to be emptied a few days later. That is the one that is contested. Critical scholars further agree that the disciples had experiences which they believed were literal appearances of the risen Jesus. And because of these experiences, number 6, the disciples were transformed from doubters who were afraid to identify themselves with Jesus to bold proclaimers of his death and resurrection. Number 7, the message was the center of preaching in the early church. Number 8, was especially proclaimed in Jerusalem, where Jesus died and was buried shortly after. As a result of this preaching, number 9, the church was born and grew. Number 10, with Sunday as the primary day of worship, a very significant thing considering that Jews felt that the Sabbath or Saturday was the holy day. So there was a change that made the church change from Saturday to Sunday. Number 11, James, the brother of Jesus, was a skeptic, but was converted to the faith when he saw the resurrected Jesus. And number 12, a few years later, Paul was converted by an experience which he likewise believed to be an appearance of the resurrected Jesus. Those are 12 facts, 11 of which solidly are held. The number one is debated among scholars, but most scholars will acknowledge that the tomb was empty. Regardless of what they feel about the resurrection, they will acknowledge that, yeah, these are verifiable historical facts. Well, so what? What does that mean, Pastor? You're boring me with all of these numbers and all of this stuff. Well, the problem is if you accept those 12 or even just those 11 facts, then any other explanation which has been postulated from a naturalistic perspective of the resurrection and has to account for these 11 facts or 12 facts, depending upon your perspective. It has to, because they're facts, accepted as facts. So any other postulation has to account for these. And all of the ones that have been postulated and looked at to date, they fall apart because of one or more of these evidences. And according to Gary, he says this: the key evidence for Jesus' resurrection is, number one, the disciples' experiences, which they believe to be literal appearances of the risen Jesus, since these experiences cannot be explained by naturalistic theories, and because they are attested as both early and eyewitness sources, as pointed out above in what he's written. The transformation of the disciples into bold witnesses. I didn't realize when I was a little kid. I looked at the church and I thought it's this big organization. You get a nice job, you get a pension, you get these funny hats to wear, you get to do stuff and don't have to work really hard. It's great, you know. Why else wouldn't Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John invent this Bible thing and, you know, get themselves a church? Well, I didn't know at that time that the disciples preached at their life's peril, that they were rejected by their own culture, by their own people, that they were killed for their belief system. Most of them horribly killed. Oh, well, that makes it different. To go from a skeptic to one willing to be beheaded or crucified or thrown from the top of the temple and crushed in the marketplace below. That makes it different. That makes the whole idea of them stealing his body and just telling a story, boy, that doesn't hold much water, does it? The empty tomb. The fact that the resurrection of Jesus was the very center of the apostolic message. The Jewish leaders could not disprove their message. They could challenge it, they could choose not to believe it, but they could not disprove it. The very existence and growth of the church speaks of the resurrection. Sunday, being the primary day of worship, demanded a historical cause. Why? Why Sunday? Why the first day of the week? The experiences of James and Paul especially. This was a very, very, very light, quick review of some heavy apologetics. But I would challenge you, if you have in the back of your mind that same question I had when I was in 4th grade, well, how do you know it's true? Well, don't just then say, well, I don't know, so it must not be. Or, I don't know, it's all taken on faith. I challenge you. Investigate it. Investigate it. Because God wants you to know the truth. God wants you to not just believe what you believe, but to know why you believe what you believe. Don't be afraid. God's not afraid. God's not afraid of your questions. And I challenge you that when you do that from an honest and open heart, you will find the truth. The promise of Jesus is, those who seek will find. If you are seeking for the truth of God, seeking for the truth of Jesus Christ, you will find it. You will find it. The resurrection of Jesus is not an hysterical reaction by the disciples, but it is historical fact. It's not a legend. It's not a myth. It's historical fact. How important is the resurrection? Well, now you got to let your fingers do the walking to 1 Corinthians chapter 15.